All right, so hey, that's enough of me going on and on about Heisman odds. If Shane were on the pod, his head would be ringing with all these numbers talk. So let's get away from that, kick it over to our interview with Preston Guy from TigerBait.com. All right, we're pleased to be joined by Preston Guy, who does an outstanding job covering the LSU Tigers for TigerBait.com. Give him a follow on the Twitter machine, as Coach O would say, at PGuy_77. Preston, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me be here, Mike. Man, I'm excited to be here. Quality Coach O reference there right off the bat.
Hey, I do my homework, believe it or not. So I know I look like a joke, but no, I actually research this stuff, and I know you guys do an outstanding job over there at TigerBait.com. So I wanted to reach out. We got National Signing Day coming up here in just a little over a week, and Brian Kelly's just got so much momentum there. He's only been there a little while, and I just wanted to start with that before we get to any recruiting questions. Are are you surprised that Brian Kelly has just taken this thing and ran with it with just so much momentum with, like I said, a month and a half on the job?
Well, it got off to a much slower start than a lot of us actually were expecting. I mean, and LSU, of course, lost a lot of commitments with Ogeron, getting forced out, and then new coach come in. That's always going to be slow. But honestly, Brian Kelly got hired at a time in which he did, leaving a potential playoff bid because of that early signing day deadline. And it was a little underwhelming, but excusably underwhelming. It's a tough call to come in because there's so much relationships involved in this recruiting process.
Mm-hmm.
To get a kid to meet a coach who, quite frankly, at Notre Dame, you're not recruiting very many of the same athletes. I mean, you might
Right.
have a handful every here and there. In fact, Notre Dame did have a kid committed from Ponchatoula, Louisiana, but of course, Brian Kelly respected that boundary and didn't even pursue him. He is pursuing his teammate, though. Oddly enough, Jacoby Matthews, 5-star safety out there, who will be on campus Friday. But it got off to a really slow start where a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads. And in fact, it was about a week and a half before we even saw any recruits posting pictures with Brian Kelly doing it. And that's one of the big differences between Brian Kelly and Coach O. Brian Kelly is a great football coach who goes into his recruiting to seal the deal. And from that point moving forward, we saw some pictures when, Quincy Wiggins and got a few guys, but basically it was like Quincy Wiggins was the headliner for signing day. And don't get
Mm-hmm.
me wrong, that's a freak of nature, top 100 player from Baton Rouge. You kind of expected him to come on board. It'd be bad if you missed on him.
Right.
But he's 6'6", 270, every bit of it. You got him. And it was kind of slow. And we knew they were going to hit that transfer portal hard. I mean, they Coach Polian, of course, that's Bill Polian's son, Brian Polian, coming from Notre Dame to LSU as a recruiting role, but also special teams coordinator, was literally producing graphics talking about transfers from LSU who have gone, like Joe Burrows of the world, the center Liam Shanahan, Braden Fajoko, who will be on my show later tonight, by the way.
Ooh, nice plug.
Little subtle plug there, but anyways, he was on the graphic. But just talking about how these transfers have had success at LSU, which is not something we've seen LSU go publicly target transfers. It's been more of a fill this hole. It's a need, go after it. So it picked up very quickly. I'm talking incredibly quickly. My show 2 weeks ago today three guys announced to LSU right before my show, and I'm just scrambling to get these guys. So Joe Fouché was a safety from Arkansas, and one day we
Mm-hmm.
saw LSU. Dwight McGlothern, the corner, announced his transfer from LSU, which of course a couple of days later he ended up transferring to Arkansas. But then
Right.
two Arkansas DBs within a 24-hour period both announced they're coming to LSU. It happened so quickly, but Joe Fouché announced his commitment to LSU. I DM'd him, said, "Hey, you want to come on the show?" He said, "Absolutely." So 30 minutes after his commitment, I was like, I couldn't confirm how to pronounce his name. I said, "Voucher." That's how quick all this stuff moves. And he was such a nice guy. He did it from a Pelicans basketball game. That's how excited he was to be a part of this LSU class. So yeah, it's been moving very fast, and that's what needed to happen. And Brian Kelly, he came in, took his time, did some evaluation, some let's wait and see evaluation, and then got to it. And there's 8 spots left in this class. Of course, signing day is in what's that, 7.5 days from now.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see how many spots. I'm kind of expecting 3 or 4 spots left of course, this year you get 32 between the transfers and your signing class, but you only signed 13 freshmen this year. Now it's a great nucleus. It's a great 13 freshmen,
Mm-hmm.
with some really key pivotal pieces. And I have a feeling the ones they might add are going to be pretty pivotal too, if they do indeed get them.
Yeah, and like you mentioned there, your interview with Joe Fouché, you can find that on the TigerBait.com YouTube page.
That's
I
right.
checked that out earlier today. Really good interview. Joe Fouché talking about coming home and his family's going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to cover him. So I know Razorbacks don't want to hear that, but hey, they got one of their own. It was like a little trade there, but
It was like a trade.
I highly recommend LSU fans go check that out. But let me ask you about the coaching staff there because you
Mm-hmm.
kind of referenced it. It was a little slow at the start for Brian Kelly. There was speculation he was trying to bring people over from Notre Dame, and of course his defense coordinator got the head coaching job, so he's not going to come. But you turn around and you get Matt House from the Kansas City Chiefs. He did a tremendous job for the Kentucky Wildcats under Mark Stoops, and then you get Mike Denbrock, who I had someone on my show the other day, Adam McClintock, who grades all these coordinators. He gave Denbrock the number one offensive coordinator grade in the entire country last
Mm-hmm.
season. So let me just ask you, which hire were you more impressed with, the offensive coordinator Denbrock or the defensive coordinator House?
Well, let me tell you this, what I'm mostly impressed with, because on their surface, neither one of them have like what I call like a Dave Aranda type energy to them, where you're like, dude, this is a grand slam. LSU is going to win the national title because of this guy. Dave Aranda, when LSU hired him, you sat there and said, that's a grand slam. There were some names sources were dropping to me that excited me more than both, just legitimately. Let
Mm-hmm.
me tell you what was exciting when talking about the X's and O's and how their styles blend together. That slow, methodical, pro style offense of Denbrock incorporating tight ends, hogging time of possession, and then talking to some insider guys about Matt House's defenses that have typically wanted a slower pace offense to complement it based on its little slightly more aggressive and multiple look style. And talking to guys who know how football works, how those pair with each other, that excited me. It kind of told me that LSU has a head football coach who is about that omni picture of the team, the big meta look of your football team, not just getting for the one flashy hire or the one flashy recruit that makes a lot of headlines. It's someone who knows how to build a team, a cohesive unit as a team. Of the two, I think they're both pretty impressive. I would kind of put them like that B plus type category, like expecting decent things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, oh man. I would. They're very neck and neck to me. They're both good hires. There's a lot of things I can't ignore about Matt House, such as he's a game away from the Super Bowl. By the way, very well respected. Tyrann Mathieu, when they announced the hire, was raving about how good a coach he was on Twitter. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying I read too much into that because every coach is going to go to bat for their guy, but that's a big name for LSU, giving him a good endorsement. But I can't ignore how Kansas City has elevated its play defensively since he got there. And I have to be curious, how much is he in those scheme meetings? By the way, since he's gotten hired at Kansas City, they've been to every Super Bowl. By the way, they're one game away from the Super Bowl right now. So he's about to go 3 for 3 on Super Bowls if he beats Joe Burrow and the Bengals this weekend. So some conflicted emotions for LSU fans there, of course. Um, the amount of just super quality NFL players he's developed during his time as a coach. Josh Allen from Kentucky, and plenty of other just absolute Aaron Donald, just absolute superstars. I can't ignore that. So I get the feeling that there's something there with Matt House that's very impressive. We've seen Denbrock with Notre Dame before, and the results were adequate. They were okay. And of course, at Cincinnati, the offense took care of business. He was there with Desmond Ridder as their quarterback, and it never was flashy, gaudy. I'm sorry, in terms of like the offensive numbers, but you did see consistently 450 yards per game type stuff, consistent, and but more importantly, you saw a lot of wins. And Cincinnati, UCF. Blah, oh man, I'm getting all mixed up here. All my undefeated group of 5 teams I've got
Yeah.
mixed up in my head.
They're all the same.
Yeah, exactly. You know what's a 12-0 undefeated team? They're just going to lose to someone in the SEC eventually, anyways, right? It's not exactly a super easy place to win. It was kind of, I mean, although Brian Kelly did actually have some success at Cincinnati, and it's not like you're going into a program that was just set up as an offensive juggernaut. So to have those good, consistent numbers, you like it. But ultimately, I think if he comes in and doesn't put up those gaudy offensive numbers at LSU, but they win like he won at Cincinnati, you'd have to be pretty excited about that, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, look, man, I'm gonna pull the PC parent answer and say they're pretty equal to me. My love is equal.
Well, you referenced all the success Brian Kelly and company are having in the transfer portal, bringing in so much talent. What do you attribute that to? Is it the relationships with, I'm hearing a lot of Frank Wilson behind the scenes working with
Mhm.
all his connections, or is it maybe just LSU just being one of the premier programs in the country and there's a need for these players? I mean, many of these guys are going to
Yeah.
be plug in play, or maybe is it a mix of the two? What do you think that is it that's made LSU so successful out of the transfer portal?
Well, as you're kind of even alluding to and asking the question there, this is not going to be a one part question. Of course, the program prestige is there. I mean, it's LSU. I mean, you look at guys like Greg Brooks and Joe Fouché, they dreamed of playing for LSU, and they didn't get that opportunity out of high school. They didn't get an offer from LSU, and then they made a name for themselves at Arkansas, and an offer was there to make a dream come true to come play for LSU and get immediate play time in a position of need.
Hmm.
That has been one thing, is just kind of that program prestige prepared with opportunities. I've had some fans point out that, hey, maybe playing in that bowl game and getting slaughtered was kind of a good thing because they saw where that roster was at for LSU. These kids are watching it and saying, dude, that's LSU, and I have a legitimate chance to get on the field and play and make a difference. Um, so playtime, roster needs, I attribute a lot of that, and um, the staff he's hired is a lot of heavy hitters in recruiting. Um, Brian Polian, big recruiter. Joe Sloan has a big recruiter as well. Cortez Hankton from Georgia, they hired, is
Hmm.
also known for recruiting. I mean, Frank Wilson is like, recruiting Jesus around here. He knows just this area so well. Brad Davis is a guy who's not only, he's from Baton Rouge originally, the offensive line coach. Of course, that was the interim coach for the bowl game.
Hmm.
From Baton Rouge, knows the area pretty well, but he's also been able to recruit the Midwest pretty well from his time at Arkansas, Missouri, those kind of places. Jamar Kane is another one who is hitting the Twitter and the recruiting real hard. I mean, a lot of just very recruiting centric coaches on this staff. Um, the last thing I'm going to highlight there is I'm hearing Brian Kelly, when he goes and meets a kid face to face, is very impressive in terms of his organization, his vision, his game plan. He's, let's get down to business and talk where you fit into our program. He impresses the hell out of people from what I've heard. So I think he's done a pretty good job as a closer. And I almost wonder if he did make a visit just now to a receiver, an in-home visit. They just tweeted out a picture just a few minutes ago from this 3-star receiver out of Texas, who we'll talk more about later. But um, he doesn't do it all that often, like the in-face. Like, he's not on the phone every single morning like Ogeron was. It's almost
Hmm.
like scarcity is the commodity with his style. Like, they want Brian Kelly to be the closer who goes in and really impresses the heck out of a family and recruits. So those are kind of the things that have stood out to me as pretty good. Of course, LSU ranks number 1 in the transfer portal and is approaching a top 10 class overall. which is pretty impressive given, he inherited about 13 commitments when he got here, about half a class.
Well, speaking of Brian Kelly and his ability to kind of get guys to buy in, one guy he got to buy in that is maybe not being talked about enough, Miles Brennan, the quarterback.
That's right.
So that kind of leads me to, what's your confidence level that LSU is going to get strong quarterback play next year with Miles Brennan, Garrett Nussmeier, Walker Howard, and then I got to ask you about this. You may not be tired of hearing it,
You
but
got to
Caleb
ask about
Williams.
him, right? Yeah.
Is that rumors out there?
Yeah.
You would know a lot better than
Yeah.
I. Is there
Yeah.
any legitimacy to that? And the only reason I feel like there kind of is at this point is everyone thinks he's going to Southern Cal. Why in the hell
Yeah.
hadn't he done it yet? So
I
I don't
get
know.
where you're coming from too, by the way. I mean, absolutely. Let me start with so let me first off, they are looking to add a quarterback in the transfer portal. Miles Brennan is a guy, which great job getting him to come back. That's a kid who wants to be on campus, who wants to be LSU's quarterback. However, he's been injured every single year. And as we
Hmm.
see in football, time in, time out, remember Bob Sanders for the Colts, very good NFL defensive MVP one year, and then 5 straight years just never could not be injured. Some guys are just injury prone.
Yeah.
So it's hard to really count him as someone you can rely upon. I would argue that you need to just get like 10-ish good games out of him, because you really don't want to play Nussmeier and you really don't want to play Walker Howard next year, because I think he needs a year to gain weight. And he's coming off an injury to his fibula, like a little micro fracture, but it was a complete clean break in his fibula, which is not, you really don't want a tibia break in your leg. That's the one where it starts to impact how you run. The fibula is more of a supportive bone. So he's going to be all right, but I want that to fully heal, and I want him to have some muscle mass built and have some time. But he's definitely your most talented quarterback on the roster, and he's probably just sheer talent wise one of the most talented players in the country. Of
Hmm.
course, he was a 5-star quarterback, and some people have him as the number one quarterback in the country. So I would really like to put some bubble wrap around him and give you some space. And if you're not really counting Miles Brennan as a guy you can rely on for reliable depth, yeah, you kind of do need to add another name in. So I'll start with the Caleb Williams. And I get where you're coming from. It does seem like USC is just the very obvious choice. I'm going to throw in some speculation with no basis, just kind of where my brain would go, just if I'm guessing what's going on with there, and that NIL stuff probably would play, like negotiating type stuff or whatever could possibly play a factor. And maybe LSU is the flag of, oh look, they're interested and I could do this, you need, so I'm
Right.
just
Right.
guessing that might be something there. you know uh I do know he likes LSU, and I covered him in his original recruiting process. It's only a year ago. And he's a very nice kid. I like him a lot. And he came to LSU's camp and was impressive, and he liked LSU, but he wanted to take his time to make his decision. That's one thing about him. He's not afraid to take some time. Um, so LSU, Ogeron he wanted his quarterback locked up before the season, and Nussmeier was ready to go. And they evaluated Nussmeier and Caleb Williams when they came to camp, and they were neck and neck on their board. They had Nussmeier as their number one quarterback in the country, next alongside Caleb Williams. So they just wanted the first one to come on board. And while it's pretty hard to lock down 2 quality quarterbacks in one recruiting class.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what happened there. I think at this point, should Caleb Williams be interested in LSU, it'd be kind of one of those obvious, okay, well, that changes things dramatically. So I could believe LSU's the runner up. I don't see a realistic scenario where he actually ends up at LSU, but never say never on these
Hmm.
kind of things. That's just how it works. But there
Man,
hasn't been a ton of substantial contact, and I
yeah.
don't think there's a visit or anything planned like that. It would be kind of one of those out of nowhere things. But Arik Gilbert was kind of like that, and he
Yep.
announced he came to LSU. Of course, it didn't really work out, but he did announce he did commit to LSU and play half a season for LSU. So things happen.
Now, it doesn't matter if LSU's got the next Joe Burrow on the roster if they can't protect him. And that offensive
Mhm.
line, that's going to be something critical this
Mhm.
offseason. How much work is Brad Davis and company going to have to do? I know they've added a couple
Yep.
transfers.
Yep.
How much work needs to be put in to field a capable unit there?
Yeah, and you're losing 3 or 4 guys who were, starters this year. Defining starters kind of a little tough based on how many guys were hurt and rotating out. So it's going to be a big rebuild. Now, when the season ended, I looked at that and I said, "Look, this is a multi-year rebuild. There's no way you can sugarcoat it and say this is going to be an elite offensive line next year." Uh, bringing in 4 commitments in the 2022 class, and that's always incredibly helpful. um 2 of them are very quality, like ready to play type guys, right? You got Emory Jones out of Catholic High here in Baton Rouge, and you've got Will Campbell, the offensive tackle
Hmm.
from Neville, Louisiana, up north. And Will Campbell's, of course, 5-star offensive tackle. He'd be a guy who'd be ready-ish to play. I mean, you never really want a freshman to play, but if you had to stick them in there, at least they're going to look respectable. But then they recruited that transfer portal, and things have changed quite a bit because they're bringing in Florida International freshman All-American tackle Miles Frazier, who I'm kind of expecting to be your left tackle day one. I mean, there's Cam Wire, who did announce his return, who will put his name in the hat there, but we'll see. And then recently they've added Tremont Shorts, um, the FCS transfer, who's impressed dramatically. I think East Tennessee is where he's from. He's
Yep.
impressed people as a good quality player. He'll be an interior offensive lineman for LSU. So, I mean, that's 6 linemen. That's a ton of linemen, and not like figuratively. I tallied up their total weights, and it's actually like 1,875 pounds. It's like literally a ton of offensive linemen they're bringing in. And quite frankly, LSU's trench problems started with the lack of quantity of linemen. I mean, there were years. I mean, the 3 years leading up to this season, they averaged signing 3 offensive linemen a year, which is just not enough bodies, especially if you're not hitting on every single
Hmm.
one of those guys. And obviously, they missed on quite a few of them. Um, so I personally believe that your recruiting class, the composition of your recruiting class, you should be able to field a football team with it. You need a
Right.
quarterback every year. You need a couple running backs. I mean, 4 or 5 receivers. You should have 5 or 6 offensive linemen, or at least 4. You know, and they just hadn't been doing that. And that's been a problem because of attrition's really high, and you might miss on a guy or two or an injury or two, and it was a really bad problem. So there's optimism for this offensive line. I think to say that it'll be elite or top notch in the SEC next year, it might be setting the bar a little too high, but I definitely could see them being, an average offensive line that's not a major problem for this team. I could definitely see that. And then the year afterward, that's where it could be setting up to be a pretty darn good offensive line as these guys develop.
All right, last thing for you, Preston. I really appreciate all your time. We already referenced it. National Signing Day just around the
Mhm.
corner. We got the 5-star Matthews in discussion. The nation's number one linebacker, Harold Perkins, just
Yeah.
decommit from A&M. Is
Yeah.
this going to be a good National Signing Day for the LSU Tigers
Yeah.
and Brian Kelly?
Yeah. Well, I feel pretty good about Jacoby Matthews. And quite frankly, if you had one of those guys, it's pretty good. So I'm feeling pretty good about Jacoby Matthews. Harold Perkins is having one of those bizarre recruiting cycles we've seen from time to time. A lot of my A&M sources are comparing it to Zach Evans, who, if you
Hmm.
followed that recruiting cycle a couple of years ago, it was an absolute nightmare. And shocker, he's leaving TCU now and going to the transfer portal and never really announced anywhere. It's been kind of crazy for him. Um, but that being said, he's going to be on campus Friday, and Jacoby Matthews is going to be there too. And we saw one of the assistant coaches for LSU. We saw Jamar Kane tweet out a picture of Devin White and
Uh-oh.
Tyrann Mathieu today. So little a safety and a linebacker, very interesting. So I think there's a lot of buzz around that, and you certainly feel much better about Harold Perkins now than you did while he was committed to A&M, because A&M's just been a monster on the recruiting trail. A&M's in on both those guys. I can tell you, Jimbo Fisher is in the state right now recruiting Jacoby Matthews. So he's not going to let go. They've been doing some monster work on the recruiting trail. These Texas 8-4 jokes that ain't going to hold up with this recruiting class. Like, I
Right.
get it. Like, everybody Clemson's until Clemson stops Clemsoning, and then
Right.
it's respected. So with this recruiting class, watch out for Texas A&M, but they're in on both those guys. Going to push really hard. I like LSU's. I think LSU's got as good a chance for Harold Perkins as anybody. So don't write LSU off on him, but it's a wacky cycle, and I'm hearing things like he may even consider Jackson State.
What?
go
Oh yeah,
go with
Dion, of
Coach
course.
Prime over there. That's the kind of wacky stuff you're hearing out of this recruiting cycle with him. So those are going to be your two big names you're absolutely watching. Those are going to be guys who aren't depth guys. They're stars for your program that you're going to build around. And I've heard Harold Perkins on the field, from guys I've talked to, he might be the best player in the country. That's how much of a beast he is out there in Texas. So you clearly want him, almost worth the drama. But I could tell you this: Brian Kelly's a no nonsense guy. Once you're on campus, it's not going to fly. And that to me makes me feel more confident signing guys like that. That there's going to be a man in the house who will provide structure, a
Right.
real structure providing coach. I think that's good for guys who maybe have a more, I don't want to say like character problems. It's not character problems, just a more flamboyant type personality. Maybe they might do better with a coach who provides structure. So stay tuned. 8 spots remaining for LSU's class. Few guys coming on campus. I'm sure they're going to try to make an impression. I would expect 3 or 4 spots open after signing day, and they're going to leave them open for transfers because after spring ball, after position
Right.
battles play out, there might be a Joe Burrow or two on the market. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Preston, I really appreciate your time. He's Preston Guy. Give him a follow, P Guy underscore 77. You can find that in the show notes, and check out all the great work they're doing over at tigerbait.com. And don't forget to check out the YouTube channel as well, also, of course, called TigerBait. Preston, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you having me.
All right, so just want to say thanks again to Preston for joining the show. I thought, that was really, really outstanding insight on what's been going on down there in Baton Rouge and what could be coming next week with National Signing Day. It's a very exciting time down there. If you're an LSU Tiger fan, we've got 2 more interviews to wrap up the week scheduled to take place. So look forward to that. I'm going to keep this thing rolling as long as we possibly can. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm muscling through to get this content out. So I hope each and every one of you appreciate it before Shane and I head on down to Orlando. We're planning to do a pod from Orlando. So, man, who knows? Shane's already promised he's going to be hammered drunk for that one. So let's see how that goes. But until then, I hope to see you on the next one. I appreciate each and every one of you hanging out. Catch you on the next one.